This is Kevin Prufer, and I'm going to be reading the poem Overheard at a Restaurant from my new book, How He Loved Them. And this poem began when I was at a restaurant by myself, eavesdropping on the table next door, and the woman at the table next door told the waiter, "Just a glass of water for me, thank you," which began this poem. Overheard at a restaurant. Just a glass of water for me, thank you. One ice cube. Thanks. Just one. But please, you order what you want. Don't be shy and don't worry about me. I'm keeping trim for our troops. That ribeye looks promising, though, doesn't it? The charcuterie platter, the bay shrimp in a nest of deconstructed kale drizzled with truffle oil. It's nice to have you home for a few days. Did you read about how they beheaded another captured soldier? Cut his head right off, clean as you like. I know it's terrible. Awful, really. It ought to be a crime. But the ice water flushes me out, gives me a kind of inner peace. All this war must have been hard on you, the bodies and the IEDs and the threatening music. It certainly has been hard on our nation, and we weren't even there. Broccolini, yes, you should have that. And the foie gras on toast with foraged mushrooms and lemon foam. You should try those too. And look at those cauliflower florets, like petite puffs of smoke. The raviolini afloat in broth like misfired paratroopers. Did you read how they sliced his head right off? You should eat. They'll send you back, and you'll be nothing but bones. How he loved them. How much the Colonel loved his granddaughters, you will never know. Their laughter filled his black Mercedes, the way a flock of starlings might fill a single tree with song. What he'd had to do that day, he'd done with a troubled heart, but now their laughter overwhelmed him with such inarticulable love, he could hardly contain it. And neither could the empathetic little bomb in the engine, which chose that moment to burst through the hood with self-obliterating joy. And the Mercedes burned in front of the courthouse, and the black smoke billowed and rose like a heart full of love, and the Colonel rose too, like burning newspaper caught in the wind, a scrap of soot, then nothing, then unknowable. You will never know what dying is like. The Colonel's granddaughters are still laughing in the back seat, or they are uncomfortable in the new bodies the bomb made for them. Oh, darling, darling, one of them recalled. You are burning up with fever. Her mother's cool hand on her forehead, then the sense of slipping under into black sleep. She's asleep now, the voice said, turning out the light, closing the door. And in every hand, smartphones made footage of their bodies, the heaps and twists of metal. The smoke uploaded the wreckage to the screen-like sky, where it goes on burning forever. You will never know if dying is like that, the same scenes repeated across a larger mind than yours. Is it like a small girl with a high fever asleep in a dark room, recollected for a moment as the brain closes down? She's asleep, the voices say. She's resting. My fleeting one. My obliterated device. My bit of pixelated soot. Hit pause, and the smoke stops, a black pillar that weighs the wreckage down. Then hit play. How much he loved them, unknowable. What the Colonel had done that day had troubled his heart, but the sound of his granddaughter's laughter lifted him high into the air, like a scrap of burning paper blown from the street into the trees. Translator. A poem in translation, the young man was fond of saying, is like the dead body of a foreigner washed up on our shores. Here he usually paused to let the metaphor sink in. Some members of the audience nodded thoughtfully. I will now read from my translations of a little-known ancient Roman poet, he told them, shuffling his papers, then looking into the dark, half-empty auditorium. The dead body refused to be still. The waves loved it too much, pushing it onto the beach, then rolling it seaward again. And so it made its way down the beach, alighting for a moment or several moments on the wet sand, then bobbing out among the American swimmers. 120 foreigners in a leaking boat is too many, so the ocean fills with poems. Some retain the qualities of their original language, but others sink into a new language. Here I am, out here. I can see your oil rigs glittering on the horizon, says the young woman, whom no one listens to. Or she says nothing, clinging to the side of the waterlogged boat where she has floated all night among the drifting bodies. A few of them became tangled among the oil rigs, while others arrived gently on our shore. A poem that has floated some distance from its accident transforms, so the people ran away in horror when at last he came to rest on a crowded part of the beach. You foreigners in your many-sailed ships, come join the empire, the translator intones from his spot-lit podium. And the audience sighs. Here I am, out here, says a little voice inside the translation, a voice no one, not even the translator, can hear. The audience had come to hear a lecture on poetry in translation, and now the translator was going on about that ancient Roman tendency to absorb and therefore transform foreign cultures, their gods and foods. Outside the auditorium, it had grown dark, a perfect summer night. The 1,000 vessels on the great black ocean glittered and loomed. And for days, bodies washed up on the beach. Now the American workers zippered them into vinyl bags, which, in the translator's metaphor, constitutes a kind of publication. But what is there to say about the young woman, still clinging to the wreckage 2 days into my poem? A gentle summer rain prickles her skin. Here I am, she says, looking toward the oil rigs, hunkering between her and the shore. Here I am. She is a very fine woman, and someone should translate her. This is the title poem of my next book. It's called The Art of Fiction. And it jumps around a little bit, so where I pause, you'll have to imagine that there's a little plus sign separating sections of the poem. And I have this idea that each section of this poem is sort of in addition to the previous section. And I imagine a kind of invisible equal sign, maybe at the end of the poem. The Art of Fiction. In my vanished youth, I wrote a poem called Fear of Old Age, in which I looked in horror on the frail bodies of the elderly, the spotted hands and looming decay. And that poem won a prize, $100, and the chance to read it to a half-full auditorium. Later in the parking lot, a woman I'd then have called very old told me, "Someday you'll understand how your poem has hurt me. I don't expect you to get it now, but someday." Now and then the memory returns. She must, I think, be dead by now. She must be dead by now. And knowing this, I can't help it. I'm smiling, because I was right to be afraid. Tonight, the internet says they are shooting cops in Dallas. The cause is social justice, and the cops are dying on the street. Last night's cops were shooting black people in Minneapolis and Baton Rouge. The cause then was public safety. Tomorrow, we will be shooting children in Cleveland, education, taxi drivers in Boston, traffic, and little old ladies in St. Louis. When Antonio Holmes, my childhood friend, black, brought his father's handgun to school, all us boys crowded around. He took it out of his knapsack, and its darkness glimmered. Antonio let us each hold it, awkwardly, before he slipped it into a paper bag, and the bag into the knapsack. "It's cool," I said, remembering its weight and chill in my hand, and Antonio smiled. "Cool," he said, and right there, on the playground, that's where the memory ends. Except all of us but Antonio were white. This is only a fact, like the gun in my hand was a fact, solid and capable. The emergence of modern humans from the vast networks of ancient hominids didn't come with our discovery of tools or even with the development of complex language. Rather, anthropologists now believe modern humans rose, obliterating all other intelligent hominid species, because of our ability to create fictions. That is, we could imagine unverifiable truths larger than ourselves, gods, ideals, meaningful cooperations toward abstract goals. And this allowed us to destroy each sentient and therefore complex community we encountered as we migrated out of Africa to new lands. This, anthropologists call the cognitive revolution. The woman who hated my poem walked toward her car with her husband. She had entered the poetry contest, but she had not won it. Death hovered over her like a great crow flexing its wings, its head pivoting this way and that as she walked toward her car. The anthropologists call the cognitive revolution the fiction of terror and immortality hanging over us, diversely meaningful. 5 cops dead in the street because how else do you respond to a construct designed to hold vast numbers of us in fear of death? An old lady trembling toward her great black chariot and out of my life. Tomorrow, Antonio Holmes says, holding his father's gun, they will kill a few more black people. But tonight I'm typing my memories on a glowing screen. Apple is a fiction made palpable by our communal agreement about its existence. Apple has workers, many of them building machines overseas as I write. It has advertisements, bank accounts, accountants, a CEO. But Apple itself exists only in our mutual habituation of its fictional essence. And the iPhones that recorded the murders of black men in Minneapolis and Baton Rouge, that uploaded those images to the web where everyone I know saw them, are concrete expressions of the same fiction we call Apple. Someday, she said, you will know how your poem has hurt me. Tottering toward her great black hearse on the far side of the community center. Someday, Antonio says, pocketing his father's gun, you will wonder what became of me. Someday you will look me up. I am looking into the great glowing screen. It's like a window I can stick my head through. If I look long enough, I feel as though I am falling into it, tumbling through blue force fields. Google, a fiction that returns to its disciples' facts. In 1988, when we were 17 years old, Antonio, pursued by police at high speed down Shaker Boulevard, put his head through the windshield and into the telephone pole that also stopped his car. Now what do you think of that? Says the old lady from the afterlife. What do you think of that? Say those 5 dead cops and the 2 dead black men. In order to form a more perfect fiction, say the anthropologists, though I can't tell if they're smiling or not. Then their cars pull from the community center parking lot and disappear into the night forever. And gentle Antonio walks across the playground into memory and haze, his knapsack slung over one shoulder. The window glows bluely into the black room, where I am forever writing my memories on glass. Earlier I read the poem How He Loved Them, which is the first poem in my new book. I'm now going to read the last poem, which is in conversation with it. This poem is called The Future. The Future. More than anything, the old man loved his only son. So on weekends, against his young wife's wishes, he flew that strange boy high above the city in his Cessna Skyhawk. Up through the snow squalls into turbulent clouds, so the boy laughed when the plane shook. And look, the old man said, look where the clouds parted, and there were the tall towers. There was the highway thick with cars. There was the neighborhood of his youth, grown new and sprawling, swimming pools and shopping centers. It was such a pleasure to show his son these things, that when his heart stopped, who could deny that the old man, high above the city of his childhood, died happy? "Hello," said the boy into the radio. "Hello?" Pressing the green button, then the black one, the airplane having retained its equilibrium. But he could not work the radio, could not answer the worried voices, the plane skimming above the rooftops and highways. "Hello?" he said, punching the buttons again, speaking into the fist-sized microphone. "Hello," the treetops answered, as the plane roared past. "Hello," the rooftops called, shuddering in the wind and snow. And the nation, which listened to the news, rushed to its 1,000 windows to watch him pass. And isn't it strange, the nation decided, how we are, all of us, hurtling onward? And isn't it lovely how the past recedes into white distances? Lovely boy, with his face pressed to the glass, while the city thinned. Harmless, darling boy, we thought, his plane like a toy. We caught him on our camera phones, compiled him to the web. And how will it end, the internet asked, voice of billions. Into a building or down in a field? Pixelated child. His father, like any of us, sunk deep into his happy past, cheek to the window where he slept his last. And the scene-comprehending hard drives purred and clicked as the airplane crossed our screens and lit our rooms with blue. I was one of those who waved from my porch as he roared past. "Hello," I called, "hello," and thought I caught a sadness in his face that later I observed more slowly on my screen. Many times I watched him slide past snow squalls and the harbor, until, far from shore, his engine dead at last, the speck of him slipped downward into the glassy ocean.